celebrating the birth, enlightenment and parinibbana of Lord Buddha. Save the people and the country by practicing the teachings of the Buddha. A message from the President. Government exceeds authorized debt ceiling for the first quarter of 2020. Donate salaries for the month of May. Mixed reactions to the request made by the Secretary to the President. Very good evening to you. You're watching Prime Time News on News First. Let's take a look at the stories in detail. Today marks Vesak Full Moon Poya Day, a day which marks the most significant events in the life of Lord Buddha, his birth, enlightenment and parinirvana.
On Vesak Day, also celebrated as Buddha Jayanti and Buddha Purnima, Buddhists all over the world commemorate events of significance to Buddhists of all traditions. The birth, enlightenment and the parinirvana of Gautama Buddha. As Buddhism spread from India, it was assimilated into many foreign cultures, and consequently Vesak is celebrated in many different ways all over the world. The week of Vesak is of special religious and cultural significance in Sri Lanka, where many events including Vesak zones, dansas, pandoors depicting the past lives of the Buddha, and lanterns signifying the central Buddhist tenet of impermanence take center stage. In 2000, considering the religious and cultural significance of Vesak to Buddhists around the world, the United Nations resolved to internationally observe the day of Vesak at its headquarters and offices.
Due to the prevailing lockdown in the country, devotees observed still within their homes to mark Vesak Poya Day. Our correspondent visited this group of devotees in Ampegama, Alutwala in Gaul. Devotees also observed religious rites at home in Adukkane and Katupata in Panduasnuwara. Religious observances were also held at the Temple of the Sacred Tooth. A special puja was also held at the premises of the Ruwanvali Mahasaya. Arrangements were made at several temples to engage the giving of alms for resident monks.
A special religious program was organized at the Agrashravaka Mahaviharaya in Maradana today under the auspices of Venerable Banagala Upatissa Nahimi Thera. The temple is home to the sacred relics of Arahant Sariputta and Moggallana. The religious program was attended by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Every year for the past several years, these sacred relics have been at the Sirasa Namami Vesak zone, enabling people from across the country to come and pay homage to the disciples. Although we could not do it this year, the Mahabodhi Society has decided to conduct the puja for the relics and invoke blessings on the country and the people. I pray that you will all receive the blessings of the Arahat Sariputta and Moggallana.
Pujas were held at the Nelligala International Buddhist Center today as well for the sacred hair relic and the relics of the Arahants which are housed there.
Devotees, both here in Sri Lanka and the world over, can pay their respects to the relic which is in the Shakya Singha chamber from the comfort of their homes. The holy relics of 29 Arahant Theras will also be venerated with offerings to invoke blessings on the country and its people.
The chief incumbent of the Mihintali Rajama Viharaya, Venerable Valawa Hengunawave Dhammaratna Nayaka Thera, made a special request of the public.
On the day of the Easter attack, we felt it as a country, but this global pandemic is felt by everyone. Everyone here in Sri Lanka and the world over have to understand and follow all the advice given by the health and security personnel with discipline and humility. May the country and the world at large be blessed by the sacred tooth relic, the Sri Mahabodhiya and Lord Buddha.
සෙතක් සාන්තියක් ආශිර්වාදයක් වේවා.
Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa participated in religious observances in line with the Vesak Poya Day at Temple Trees today. Venerable Omare Kashyapatero presented a copy of his book titled Budumaga Yali Sihiganwu Corona to the Prime Minister. A face mask designed by an advanced level student with a 99% air purifier was also presented to the Prime Minister.
The Venerable Rajagiriya Aryanyana Theru expressed these sentiments during his sermon broadcast on our sister channel Sirasa TV earlier today.
At a time when there is an investigative outlook at the noble truths and its impact on our world is being felt, I would like to say that this beautiful Vesak Poya Day is the most beautiful Vesak Poya Day that I have seen in my lifetime. The truth about suffering is known. Inquisitiveness is shining. What is the reason for suffering? It is craving. Then, my dear faithful friends, there is no reason to run around looking for the reason behind the coronavirus. There is only one reason for it, not two. What is the reason for it? It is the craving one has to satisfy their five senses. The craving for visible form, the craving for touch. It is the craving to stimulate the very things that we know will fade with time. Who is the person responsible for this craving? Lord Buddha in the Dhammadayada Sutra preaches, Venerable Theras, when the leader of a nation does not abide by the Dharma, his ministers will not abide by the Dharma. When the ministers do not abide by the Dharma, their representatives will not abide by the Dharma. When the representatives will not abide by the Dharma, the clergy will not abide by the Dharma. And when they do not abide by the Dharma, the entire populace and the world at large will be engulfed in sickness. Then those responsible for setting the wrong example to all those across the world are the national leaders from then and now, enamored with craving and unholy expectations, inciting racism, religious extremism, robbing from poor countries. These national leaders are the ones who are responsible for this situation. This craving is a wave that stems from the thoughts, deeds, actions and beliefs of these rulers and comes crashing upon the society.
සරීරෙන් මනසෙන් ගලාගෙන එන මතුවෙලා දෝරේ ගලපු තුෂ්ණාවේ සැඩ පහරයි පිංගතුනි කොරෝනා මේ භයානක අකුසලයක් දක්වා මේ සමාජය මතු කරලා දුන්නේ.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in his message for Vesak said, quote, "At this time of calamity, let us determine to save the people and the country by practicing the teachings of the Buddha and adhering to the COVID-19 prevention measures," unquote. The president's message added he was confident that Sri Lankans and people across the world could attain physical and spiritual health by practicing the teachings of the Buddha during this season of Vesak. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in his Vesak Day message said the best way to face the ongoing pandemic situation is to discipline the mind, body and word. The Premier added the Vesak Poya Day should be celebrated while safeguarding the victories in the fight against COVID-19. Meanwhile, former President Maithripala Sirisena in his Vesak Day message said, as a nation, overcoming this challenge will not be difficult. The former president in his message thanked all doctors, nurses, security forces and public sector employees for their untiring effort and dedication with qualities such as kindness and compassion. Former opposition leader Sajid Premadasa in his Vesak Day message said, during this challenging time, the Dharma of the Buddha has resurfaced. The former opposition leader urged all citizens to celebrate Vesak while adhering to the instructions of health authorities and observing social distancing measures. The leader of the Samagijana Balavega also tweeted a few verses from the Dhammapada scripture. The tweet read, "Health is the ultimate profit. Happiness is the ultimate wealth. A trusted is the best relative. Nibbana is the ultimate bliss."
Keeping you updated on some local news updates. According to a Verite research, the government has borrowed 120 billion rupees in excess of its legal borrowing limit for the first quarter of 2020.
The Bulletin account held in October in 2019 allows the government to borrow up to 721 billion rupees for a period between January and April this year. According to the analysis presented by Verite Research, government borrowings have reached approximately 841 billion rupees.
Transparency International Sri Lanka has cautioned the government of loosening policies on accepting foreign currency as it could encourage money laundering.
The government had recently introduced a special deposit account to attract foreign currency for periods of 6 months or 1 year while offering premium interest rates amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Transparency International Sri Lanka cautioned that the no questions asked policy could result in detrimental effects on Sri Lanka's post-COVID-19 economic recovery. It observed that Sri Lanka was delisted from the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force or FATF only recently. This list includes countries that experience deficiencies in countering money laundering and terrorist financing. The anti-corruption body said, quote, "We strongly believe that any new policy should be consistent with Sri Lanka's anti-money laundering framework," unquote. TISL recalled that it had raised similar concerns regarding the potential money laundering risks surrounding the foreign direct investment for the Mirijavilla oil refinery project in Hambantota, worth $3.85 billion last year, and when a similar no questions asked policy was proposed by then Finance Minister Ravi Karunanayake in 2015.
Various views were expressed with regard to President Secretary Dr. P.B. Jayasundara's appeal to all state sector employees requesting them to donate their salaries for the month of May. The letter requesting public sector employees to donate their entire salary for May or a portion of it is to be issued to all employees through the heads of their respective state bodies. The letter pointed out that the government requires at least 100 billion rupees to pay the salaries and allowances of public servants. Dr. P.B. Jayasundara said that the government will be able to reduce the budget deficit if salaries are donated to the Widows and Orphans Pension Fund, as it could reduce expenditure and increase revenue. He added that this measure would assist in managing the country's debt and also reduce the economic burden on the people. The President Secretary pointed out that the country must display its own strength while obtaining loans, grants and relief from foreign countries. He said that all officials at the Presidential Secretariat have donated their salaries for the month of May to the Widows and Orphans Pension Fund. Dr. Jayasundara said he believes that employees who find it difficult to donate their entire salary can donate half of their salary, a week's earnings or a day's pay.
Secretary to the President P.B. Jayasundara has penned this letter as a personal request. However, it has been converted into a letter issued by the President simply because the President's letterhead was used. On the other hand, if this is in fact a personal request, why have copies of it been directed to the Attorney General and the Auditor General? That makes it seem as if it could be used as a legal document. What they are truly attempting to do is to cut off a sum from the state employees' monthly remuneration. This is the middle ground between it being made official and unofficial. While the Secretary to the President is attempting to slash salaries, doesn't he know that the Cabinet has approved a loan of 15 billion given by China to construct a 105-kilometer road? That is 140 million per kilometer. Doesn't he know that the Cabinet approval was given last week to obtain a loan of 31,000 million for the construction of the Central Expressway? On the 26th of March, the same Cabinet approved a recommendation to allow state ministers to continue to use their official vehicles subject to a fee. However, fuel allowances would be provided by the government. State ministers do not have the right to use official vehicles. If it is only the Cabinet that is functioning, it should be that way. Officially at present, there are only cabinet ministers. Not even they can use their official vehicles for propaganda activities. If the President's secretary, who is a notable figure in a cabinet which misuses state property, continues to enjoy the whole range of perks given to them and squanders state funds, issues a personal request utilizing the letterhead of the executive, that is a serious issue. Many people are making sacrifices. However, what the government is attempting to do now is to loot the salary of the state sector workers. We consider this a letter issued in a conspiratorial manner. One cannot slash the salaries of state sector employees forcefully. If state employees are willing to donate their salaries, there is no issue. It is a request. Back then, during the early days of the war, there were state employees who donated their entire salary. Even state workers who earn a daily wage donated it. In light of such a disaster, the people should think for themselves and make decisions. We are not ready to impose this through law. There are 20 ministers in the cabinet. The president and the prime minister are also part of the cabinet. They should have set an example by pledging to contribute their salaries, benefits and other privileges. But none of them initiated such actions. There are certain MPs and ministers who benefit from both a salary and a pension. At present, the entire general public is living amidst several hardships. State sector employees are struggling to make ends meet. Against such a backdrop, in my view, it is unfair to make such a request. I contribute my monthly salary to the fund as well. It was only a request. No one is forcing you to do so. It is clear that certain factions are trying to mislead the general public and the state sector employees in this regard.
Who is the state official making such a request? It's PB Jayasundara. According to former Minister Vimal Veeravansa, he is an economic assassin. These funds will be directed to the Consolidated Fund. Only Parliament can access these funds, but at present there is no Parliament. So who will approve matters pertaining to the fund? Requesting people to transfer their salaries to a fund for which there is no approval process is similar to crediting funds to the Tsunami Fund.
They are always trying to find fault with the government. The President, the Prime Minister and the entire government always gives priority to the well-being of the general public. Their safety comes first. In my view, this was a very good decision. I believe state sector employees will support this decision to save our country. On one hand, the government is requesting state sector employees to donate their salaries to the fund. On the other hand, the government is approving loans worth billions for expressway projects. How can the government revitalize the economy by allocating funds to construct roads rather than making provisions to uplift the private sector that has been affected by the ongoing health crisis? The government must support the private sector. Approving loans for expressways, development projects and transferring salaries to the fund are all part of the government's plan to loot public money. We must warn all state sector employees beforehand. If the Treasury Secretary issues a gazette notification making it compulsory for all state sector employees to donate their salaries to the fund, do not fall prey to such a decision. As we all remember, Lalit Veeratunga, a former secretary to the President, was sentenced to a term in prison for illegally allocating funds to purchase silk cloths for political campaigning upon the instructions of the President.
Previously, News First reported on a revelation which was made at the monthly meeting of the Hambantota Municipal Council regarding an irregularity which had occurred pertaining to a plot of land falling under the purview of the council. A similar scam is now being reported from the Bandara Puliyankulama area in Saliyapura, Anuradhapura.
A plot of land ranging from the bank of the Malwatha River, which flows from the Bandara Puliyankulama area, has been classified a reserve. The following visuals bear witness to the matter, in which an unknown group has illegally acquired the reserve, which borders the Bandara Puliyankulama village. Area residents warn of the severe environmental consequences the destruction of this reserve would bring forth. During a media briefing held in Anuradhapura today, News First inquired from the Minister of Wildlife, S.M. Chandrasena, regarding the issue.
The Bandara Puliyankulama village is situated in the Anuradhapura district. I asked about this from the district wildlife officer. He assured me that he would probe the matter. If such destruction is in fact happening, I would take every step necessary to punish those responsible.
Isn't it a cause for astonishment that authorities were not aware of such a land grab carried out in broad daylight?
While the people of Mahiyanganaya are suffering in such a manner, we received reports of two families with nowhere to go in Dehiyatta Kandiya. This comes in the aftermath of a recent report on how ministers of former governments had not handed over their official residences well past the date on which it was supposed to have been turned in. These two homes in Bambarawana, Dehiyattakandiya, were demolished on the advice of officials of the Mahaveli Development Authority after they were classified as unauthorized constructions.
We built our house here. We had cultivated here too. The Mahaveli Authority officials came and gave 1 week for it to be demolished. A few days ago they took us to the police and asked my father to sign and hand it over. Then they came and demolished the house. We have been here since 1993. We went multiple times but they didn't give us a permit. There are only 20 perchers here. All 3 families live here. There is no permit. We have nowhere to go. We are very poor. My children are here and in fear. My children are crying in fear. There are wild animals. We will even get wet and remain here, but we will not leave.
Right down this road there are big houses, all of which have received electricity as well. All of them are unauthorized. The problem is that this treatment has been meted out only to these 2 families. These constructions may be unauthorized, but during a pandemic, when the country is in lockdown, is it acceptable to deliberately displace people from their homes?
7 more patients have tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Sri Lanka to 804. 17 more patients have recovered, bringing the total number of recoveries to 232.
The Abeyapura village in Lankapura, Polonnarwa, which was isolated, has been reopened. 29 patients tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday. Among the 29 are 24 Navy personnel who are undergoing quarantine. Among those detected was a resident of Bandaranaike Mawatha and 3 individuals who had come into contact with Navy personnel who had tested positive for the virus. At present, 5,133 individuals are undergoing quarantine at 41 quarantine centers. About 230 individuals who completed their quarantine period left the quarantine centers today.
An Italian coronavirus vaccine developed by the Turkish company has antibodies generated in mice that work on human cells.
This was reported according to tests carried out at the Infectious Diseases Hospital in Rome. Quoting the chief executive officer of the company, the Italian media reported that for the first time in the world, a COVID-19 candidate vaccine has neutralized the virus in human cells. He said this is the most advanced stage of testing of a candidate vaccine created in Italy.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have widespread impacts on workforces globally, migrant workers are among those bearing the brunt of the crisis. Adra Hassan spoke to a founding director of Walk Free, an Australian-based international human rights organization, about their recently published report, Protecting Vulnerable People in a Pandemic.
We have with us this evening a founding director of Walk Free, Grace Forrest, joining us via Skype. Welcome to the News, Grace, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start off by asking you, why have you published this report now, and why do you find it so important?
We have published this report now because we're in the midst of an unprecedented global crisis. And what we are seeing at alarming rates is vulnerable people, vulnerable populations being left behind and excluded from national dialogues and public health plans. No group is this more acute to than vulnerable migrant workers. Countries like Sri Lanka, which rely heavily on remittances and currently have over 1 million people trapped overseas, sending remittances home. This is a valuable workforce that deserves the protection of business and government.
What do governments, nations, companies have to do now to face this uncertain tomorrow?
What we need to do is remember that safety in a public health crisis is a team sport. Leaving people behind is not just deeply problematic from a human rights perspective, but also from a public health and economic perspective. If the world plans to return to any kind of normalcy, we cannot leave vulnerable populations behind, and governments need to take urgent action to protect workers within their borders, to help repatriate workers who want to come home. We are calling on business and government to create visibility within their supply chains. It is unacceptable to leave anyone behind in this crisis.
Well, thank you, Grace, for joining us on our news tonight. It's back to the main studio.
Thank you, Astra. Let me draw your attention onto a serious note. Even at a time like Vesak, intended for the celebration of the very best qualities of humanity, we are reminded that acts of inhumanity continue to occur. This incident was reported from Negombo. The following images may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Despite the sensitive nature of this footage, we have decided to broadcast it so our viewers can comprehend the gravity of this inhumane act. CCTV footage shows that this incident had taken place at St. Anthony's Mawatha in the Periamul area in Negombo at around 6:20 a.m. Shots were fired at this dog from a house in the neighborhood. The dog succumbed to its injuries minutes after the shooting. For many pet owners, their dogs are like members of the family, and this is no different for the Fernandos, who have cared for and raised this animal. Police scene of crime officers arrived at the scene of the incident to conduct investigations.
The dog which we owned previously was also poisoned. We don't know who did that. When such incidents take place, we begin to question humanity itself.
Police say that a retired police officer had been arrested in connection to the shooting and had been released on bail.
The person who has done this shooting can be prosecuted under the provisions of the Cruelty to Animals Ordinance, as well as there is also a possibility of him being prosecuted under different sections of the penal code also. An investigation has to be launched about why this person was compelled to do it, or what was his motive, and whether he was on sound mentality when he committed this kind of a crime.
For many years, animal rights activists and the general public at large have cried out for the enactment of an animal welfare bill and the strict enforcement of laws to prevent cruelty against animals. While successive governments have failed to heed this call and treat this issue as a priority, frequent incidents of cruelty against animals continue to be reported. A draft animal welfare bill, which was approved by Cabinet in 2016, continues to languish in bureaucratic limbo. Residents of Galgamur have requested authorities to provide prompt treatment to a baby elephant who is in pain.
The wounded baby elephant was spotted amongst a herd of elephants in the vicinity of the Monnekulama tank in Galgamur over the past several days. Officials of the Galgamur Wildlife Office had been informed about this 4-year-old calf by local villagers. The locals state that the officials had been around for a number of days but were yet to inspect the calf as a doctor had not arrived. The residents asked that some treatment be offered before the elephant dies. Meanwhile, 8 elephants had roamed around Vergamtota in Hasalaka in search of food last night. Our reporter stated that the elephants had caused damage to 3 homes and a paddy storage centre near the bridge junction. These animals are from the Madroya and Wasgamore forest reserves. Locals state that these elephants travel along the Mahavali River and enter these villages and request that some solution be provided for this problem.
Researchers in the central province have discovered a new species of spider believed to be endemic to Sri Lanka.
This spider, also known as the bird-eating spider, is a nocturnal creature. Zoologists have so far found 14 such species endemic to Sri Lanka. The spider has been designated as a species to be conserved at the International Wildlife Conservation Convention 2019. Our correspondent said that following heavy rains, the spider had found its way to one of the many houses at the end of the Gannuruwa forest. Subsequently, based on information provided by the owner of the house, environmental explorer Pradeep Samaravikrama retrieved and later released the spider safely back into the Gannuruwa forest.
Species we found ivory tiger spider, scientifically we call Oslotheria sapusca. In Sri Lanka central region we can found this species, and this is endangered species. This is a rare animal, therefore we translocate it into suitable place. They eating small birds, rats, frogs and insects, etc. And also they are living in tree holes and not making a web. They have several traits, especially illegal pet trade, and habitat loss are main pets for them.
Now on a lighter note, this is how the Rajapaksa family celebrated Vesak. That brings us to the end of the news bulletin, but do not go anywhere. We have Mr. Faraj Shaukat Ali joining with Newsline with an interesting guest, a person who is a social media sensation at times, a person who has had a hiatus in terms of the media for a while. Faraj, who is our guest on Newsline this evening?
Thank you very much, Chaturanga, and our guest this evening is a gentleman who has 26 years of parliamentary experience and is quite a name within the United National Party and very well known to the public of the Republic of Sri Lanka. He's right here, having also held several positions at ministerial level and including in the Cabinet of Ministers, where during his one of his last jobs he was also selected as the best finance minister in Asia 2017. It's none other than Mr. Ravi Karunaka. Very good evening to you, Ravi.
Good evening, Faraj.
And thank you very much for popping into Newsline Live.
Thank you.
In our news settings. Can I get straight to the point and ask you, what is this difference of opinion that you and one of your colleagues, Mr. Mangala Samaravira, has in terms of the presidential ability to dip into the consolidated fund or not? I would have thought that you'd, in these exceptional times, you would have some sort of unity.
No, I mean, sense of unity exists all over, but it just, the differing opinion is that at a time when there is a contingency or emergency, and at a time when you can't recall Parliament for reasons best known on the pandemic, on the corona, the situation that I say is that while the vote on account has given funds for 3 months, which basically comes to end on the 30th of April 2020, and if by that time the funds are extinguished, the President under 153 or under contingencies on the situation which basically he has no other exception but to spend on the consolidated fund under 151 and 152, he can spend until and such time that he can bring in or recall Parliament, either the new Parliament or the existing Parliament. But whatever the situation is, I say that finally the legality must prevail. And the only thing is recalling, utilizing the consolidated fund to spend exists in the President's hand is what I say.
And so clearly with all these sort of diverse views, even within the mainstream political party and its members, wouldn't it have been the almost obvious thing for President Rajapaksa to consult and seek an opinion from the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that is the necessity at this particular hour. But what he has basically decided was that he will go forward with the 30th of April and after that decide what has got to be done. Right. But now that it ceased to go forward, that means today is the 6th of May, and he has no other option but to utilize the consolidated fund. I think it is prudent that the Supreme Court is called upon to give an opinion.
Which is now, in any case, several parties have gone forward to the Supreme Court.
But that's going to public litigation.
Right. So now we have about 11 different people going to an organization, including a group of about 8 people led by Victor Ivan. Then we have the Center for Policy Alternatives, and we have the young legal man, Charita Gunratna, also having sort of knocked on the Supreme Court's door. But there's something that I noticed. The United National Party haven't taken any action. What are they? Why is that?
No, it is just because the rest of the Dimbang wants to go to court. Yeah. It does not necessarily mean that we have got to. We are doing certain other things.
I would have thought that you all would have led the
No, we are doing something more. We are doing something more spectacular. We'll see. And
are you able to tell us what that is?
We will see in the next couple of days. We like to keep.
Why not tell us here on Newsline?
No, what we want to do is to ensure that the spending is made legal, and we will follow through as to what we intend doing with that particular one.
Okay. Now then,
because
as always,
really the first and the second case have been gone, is to ensure that you basically renunciate the gazette that was done, which was revoked in the Parliament.
Yes.
Now, that is a different one to what we are saying.
That's right.
We are saying that is a different one. We are going on the basis whatever spend that has got to be done should be made legal.
Right. As always on Newsline Live, we encourage you to send us your questions by SMS, please, right through, right here. But don't call the number 0772 300 305, 0772 300 305. And who better than Mr. Ravi Karunaka to answer the questions? After all, a former finance minister of Sri Lanka. Now then, whilst we are waiting for the questions to start coming in, can I ask you this? Independent analysis of the employment figures and so on suggests that perhaps up to about 1.1 million people may well be out of a job. Isn't that the conversation that the country ought to be having now?
Well, that is most important one. After all, the workforce has roughly about 7.5 billion, with 1.6 million people being on the government side, which basically spend roughly about 90 billion. That is for the salaries and the pensions per month, and having an impact of 1.1 trillion for a year. Now that is 1.6 billion of the workforce is on government servants. Right. Then you have the private sector, which is roughly about 2 million. Then you have the day-in workers, roughly about 1.8, and the self-employed, which is roughly about 1.8 billion. So when you put all together, it's about 7.6 billion of the workforce. And certainly your figure, what you mentioned, may be even more, considering the fact that the self-employed are severely hampered, and the day-to-day workers are basically, we'll find that it's hard to find a day's work that is
62% of the workforce are
informal sector,
unskilled.
Unskilled and informal sector.
How are we going to sort them out?
Well, I don't think the informal sector will have the difficulty, but it will be the middle class and more or less the entrepreneurial skills that are there of the people that will get basically stagnated, or I would say basically held up, owing to the fact that there will be lack of demand, lack of fund flows that will be given from the banks, so into thinking whether it is a dangerous time, and the interest rates, in any case, preclude people from borrowing. The region has an interest rate of about 5 to 6%, when Sri Lanka has 14 to 16%. So I think one of the first things that need to do is to recreate the, I would say, the environment for borrowing at a cheaper rate, so that your risk factor is reduced.
And the other thing, of course, to ask is that companies all over the world, but let's talk about Sri Lanka itself, are completely, if you like, for want of a better word, stuffed because of the global economic conditions caused by COVID-19. Do you think that this government is doing enough in terms of relief aid? We have a figure of pretty low figure of 0.03% of the GDP, which seems rather low to me, compared to other economies where it's around roughly about 10% of GDP.
For us, if you look at the Sri Lankan economy, which is roughly about 115 trillion, right, which basically works out to about 50 billion a day. Right, when you 50 billion a day in GDP terms, right, then what you're basically looking at is absolutely nothing. Stimulus package that has been given, 50 billion, hardly sufficient. That is one day's revenue.
Right.
So that would be insufficient to resurrect us from the economic plague that has taken place owing to the fact that Corona has. But I must say that the economy was not any case healthy even before Corona.
Right.
So there were rectifications that were needed to be done. You look at the state of the economy. If you look at the 2020 year, you had roughly the total revenue being about 1,980 billion.
Right.
That's 980 coming from customs, about 800 coming from inland revenue, 120 from excise, and the balance from dividends and fines, etc., which was coming to 1,980 billion. And your expenditure was roughly about 4,600, which was going on the basis of interest about $1 billion, capital repayment about 800 million, your salaries and pensions of 1.1 trillion, then your capital expenditure 760, your public maintenance and utilities 760. When you go on to that basis, you are suddenly finding that you have a yawning gap between 4,600, that's 4.6 trillion, against a revenue of 1.9 trillion. So your budget deficit of 2.6 trillion was roughly about 5% of GDP.
Right.
But today you're talking of a GDP of last year ending at about 11% of GDP, and this year projected to be around 11 to 12% of the GDP.
Right.
So on that score, you have got to do far more than what it is that is seen in order to get the economic kick started. You have 50 days of curfew, that is a complete lockdown, and you don't know when it will open up, because I must say that's well beyond the control of the government. And on this score, you are basically having a situation that you are unable to get the future prognosis as to when the country would be started. So on that score, you need a much bigger stimulus package, and I think it has to be revolutionary. You know, this is like coming out of the Second World War, when everything is dead and gone, and you have to think afresh. If you go to look at what the IMF, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank are going to say, you will get nowhere. So you have got to start your own activities.
Right.
Start, local economic revival. If you can't get that, get foreign technology that is coming. If not, get foreign investment. All those will be dearer. I mean, easy to talk from opposition point of view. But these are what we did when we came in on 8th of January 2015.
Now then, several questions coming through. And one is that there's some sort of consternation, and I think that your members of your party have also said the same thing, that this 5,000 rupees isn't good enough, isn't enough.
No, it is hardly sufficient.
What is the amount that you would, if you were the finance minister, what would you do?
Well, you today, if you look at the poverty ratio that are shown, a family of 4 to 5 require about 65,000 rupees a month, that is shown from the government statistics. And on that score, you are basically looking at today 5,000 being given against that.
Ravi, somebody else is also saying successive governments have brought the country's economy to the current state that it is in. Do you agree?
I agree that. For the 73 years as independence, every country, every government has been somewhat responsible for the added public debt that is there. Of course, in a developing country, public debt does basically increase. And owing to the fact that you have external externalities like the dollar being depreciated, owing to currencies appreciating in other countries that are out of our control, you basically have a situation today, we have 13 trillion as public debt. And on that score, you're basically having a huge, almost 25% of government revenue going against debt amortization and interest payment. So when you say 5,000 is hardly sufficient, now you have two ends. One is basically the external factor.
There's another question here. In terms of the expenditure and the situation the current government faces at the moment, compounded of course by COVID-19, it is absolutely astounding that a couple of projects which was unable to be implemented by under the government of Mr. Wickremesinghe and Sirisena, which you were part of, namely Section 3, the highway and so on. Section 4 was also stuck. It's almost, and that was cancelled. The bank withdrew its offer, and so on. And now they have now announced, in between all this and no money, the private sector is taking a salary cut on the understanding that when things get better, they will come back to the level that they were, and even better perhaps. But to then, in between all this, to ask the public sector, as indeed Dr. Jayasundara wrote to them yesterday, and asked them to take a salary cut or to donate part of their salary, that's completely unacceptable.
Well, the government service, as I said, has 16 lakhs of workers, which is roughly 1.6 million, and the total bill of 90 billion a month being salaries and pensions. So on that score, you find the cash flow problem that they exist, because when the government came in, one of the main things that, remember when we pushed up the revenue from 1 trillion in 2014 to 2 trillion in 2018, you basically had a 100% increase in revenue. But what happened was, after 2018 to 2020, you basically had the same stagnant revenue. It was 118 to...
But Ravi, would you agree with me when I say that half the frustration of the people of the country and the entrepreneurs of our country who want to take this country forward, and the opportunity makers, the creators of opportunity, half those problems would have been not present if the level of corruption was under control. Successive governments in Sri Lanka have done almost nothing about the level of corruption.
Faraz, that's a very easy word to throw out. Every government is trusted upon that. Yeah. What basically happens is, when you can't get a job done, it is corruption that is there. My belief is lack of decision making, indecisiveness, and basically the government servants procrastinating decisions. Now I'll just show you one classic example to give you an answer. From 2005 to 2018, the total direct taxes that has been paid. This country, we have only roughly about 100,000 direct tax files.
Right.
And you have a total direct taxation of 2.4 trillion collected.
Yeah.
In rupee terms, in direct taxation. The rupee depreciation for the same period 2005 to 2018, I couldn't get 2019 as we are not in office, was 2.5 trillion. So your entire direct taxation has lost out to devaluation.
Well,
on that basis,
that's almost understood, because when you all took over, the dollar was 130 for various reasons, including the matters of the central bank and so on. We ended up with, what was it, when President Nandasena took over, it was what, about 180 plus.
But that's exactly what I'm telling. These are things that you've got to action. They look at trying to say 30% taxes coming in direct taxation. They don't worry about what doesn't happen, that's strengthening the rupee. You're probably balance of payments on one side, which is the dollar reserve that are there matching the rupees that are required to make dollars to pay out. You basically lose out owing to the inefficiency factor of not taking the correct decision at the right time.
Several questions asking us to ask you to give a specific figure. Why, if you were the Minister of Finance, the 5,000 you say isn't enough. How much in rupees and cents would you give?
Well, I would basically, without any fear, I'm a person that, on behalf of the government that I represent, the United National Party, when we said we are giving 10,000 rupees for the government servants, which for 11 years they were languishing not getting it, in 31 days we were able to give it, and they still stand to get 10,000 rupees increase in their salaries. Likewise, during this period, when there's a chronic situation, I would have, without any fear, ensured that each family gets a minimum of 20,000.
20,000. And
rupees.
how would you do that? Print more money?
No, that's not the case. Remember, did we pay the 10,000 by printing more money? No, we had innovative skills. We managed to get super gain taxes that were there one-off. In order till the revenues are there.
There are a lot of unhappy cookies about
There are
that.
a couple of 10 guys will be unhappy, but you've got to look at the 21 million people that are there.
Right.
That's why it's the indecisiveness. And if you do that, you'll suddenly have somebody saying...
But we have the opposite of that when in this government... When
Can I just give you an answer to the last one?
Yeah.
I want to stress the fact that when you are basically taking a bold initiative on behalf of the economy, you will have 10 people that will basically be guiding you by saying, these are a pack of guys who are basically having a vested interest and trying to torpedo. But I just showed how direct taxation, we want to reduce it from the 30% down to 12% and show that you give a stimulus to the economy by ensuring that you work for yourself rather than work for the government. And end of the day, you end nowhere because the tax files are there. It is a matter of government servants just pushing one tax file into the other without getting revenue. But on the other side, you have created a huge incentive into the market by having been one of the lowest tax regions in this area.
Politically speaking, what would you do? Because I can't see any difference. It's almost like you're the current Minister of Finance. What would you do?
No, I am not.
Politically speaking, what would you do different that this government is doing?
Well, I think President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has the decisiveness in making a decision and standing by. I will basically tell him to ensure he has a non-party approach to make a national economy out of this state. Because it's not an easy situation. There's no point me from opposition, maybe temporary or otherwise. Are
you promoting the cause of a national government?
No, I'm not. I'm saying a national economy. Right. Because if we lose the economic war, we have lost all wars. Remember, we had a war for 30 years. We lost, I would say, 200 trillion. And end of the day, where are we? Then we come out of that into a tsunami. Then we come out of that into Easter bomb. Then we come into that into
now that 10,000 rupee thing, wasn't that one, what shall we call it? Wasn't that an election gundu?
Well,
didn't it cause you a great deal of panic later when you became the Minister of Finance?
Political parties have to get elected, and in order in doing elections, you've got to give certain things which are practical. Now, as a collective, as a party, they decided that they give 10,000 to the government servants.
Right.
Remember, when we gave 10,000, a lack of gratitude. At the end of the day, when they voted, we had almost 65% of governments are not voting for us.
Yeah.
But we still stood by the promise we gave. That's why I said, if you basically give a word, you've got to carry it out. Same way I say at this particular moment, they are being, the 5,000 is a pittance, it's a political gimmick.
So you'd give them 20,000?
I give 20,000 as well as ensure that the banks are given a much easier task. Today, when you go to get a bank loan...
But they didn't give them 20,000, they gave them 5,000, but they passed two projects at this time. Isn't that spectacularly poor timing?
Well, that is a government's call, that we basically saying, when they're saying they're stuck for money going on that basis, it's hilarious. But remember, that's two ends. One is a capital expenditure and one is a recurrent expenditure.
Does the President have the right, when you say that he has the right under Section 153 and so on, to spend money on capital expenditure?
No. What he has basically got is the amount of
public services.
The money that is there to be spent. On the 23rd of October 2019, we allocated on the vote of account 1,469 as expenditure and 721 billion as borrowing.
Right.
Now that borrowing can go into capital expenditure as well.
Right.
So whether this, I think it is 50, I think it's relatively for 58 kilometers of 161 billion that has been basically utilized to spend for this particular one, and I think 31 has been allocated for this fourth phase, that is Kurunegala-Rudambulla project, for a British company called Roughton or something like that, right? Which is 58.5 kilometers, total expenditure 161 billion and 31 billion for the first phase.
No difference from the figures that was being bandied about
when we were doing it, the exchange rate was roughly in the range of 158 to 60, 170 rupees a dollar.
Yeah.
And then now
But this is set in dollars anyway, this whole...
No, but these rupees.
Right.
31 billion was rupees.
Right.
So it will basically be, now is 200, so you'll have almost a 20% increase.
Right.
So that's the case whether it is within the borrowing limits that are there. But that is irrelevant. I'm only going...
But at $200 million and at a commercial rate of about 6,000 rupees per PCR test, we can test about 6.3 million people.
I don't in any way say no to that. I guess we should be testing up to about 10,000 people a day. But we are not, we are just...
Well, we have said 6 million people at $200 million.
Yeah, but even in USA, you have only about 100,000 being tested. So I guess with our per capita income, we have to be realistic in what we do.
Yeah.
But if not for what UMP increased from health expenditure from 1.1% GDP to 3% in the 15, 16, 17, 18 years, you would have been really hamstrung today without health expenditure. Now on that score, what you're basically saying, there are two ways. One is the capital expenditure for the roads and the recurrent expenditure that is there for health that is there. Now any amount of money can be allocated at a time of emergency in order to ensure that the people are looked at. I mean, this is not a case of trying to have an election when the people are in jeopardy. So we must first ensure the people are made to live, and that is the way you've got to go forward.
I think we finished this program at 10 o'clock. Now then, let's say, Ravi K, that if you win your seat in north of Colombo, considering that you're running with the UMP and the SJB as well and everybody else, and let's say that you win and you get another chance at the plum job to maybe re-establish yourself as the best finance minister, what would you do and how would you go about bringing the economy back again?
I would ensure that win the election, would we still have a president who is basically elected for another 4 years beyond that day. So on that basis, that's why I always meant to ensure that we have a national economy. Because if we win, if we lose the economic war, we have lost all wars. And that's why I want to strengthen, knowing the fact of the burden that is there when you have the finance.
But aren't we losing now?
Beg your pardon?
Aren't we losing that
That's
war
exactly what I'm saying. If we have a concerted effort, because at the end of the day, it is a national economy. You can't say the blue, green, blue or yellow. Finally, it is a national economy. So if we basically point fingers and just let it crumble just because saying it is the oppositional government, that is the fault that we have done for 73 years. At least at this time, let's get together and ensure that we have a strong national economy that will help to ensure that we get where the Sri Lankan should be. You know, our per capita is today 4,100 when Japan is 55,000. And remember, in 1948, Japan and we were having $49 per capita per person. Today, how is the difference? They had no natural resources, they were throttled after Second World War, and the difference is the national unity and the sense of purposes they were going forward. And that's what we have got to do today.
Unfortunately, Ravi, we've run out of time today. I wanted to ask you about the open economy in the sense the open accounts to bring in foreign exchange.
I think that's a very good idea.
Amidst concerns from Transparency International.
That's the problem. You do one act that is there to bring in things. You know, today Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, everything. You look at Turkey, Indonesia, all have brought this amnesty in.
We're going to have to save this for another one. No. Perhaps you want to come on a longer program. Now then. It said, somebody here is pointing out that you couldn't work with the SLFP, how can they work with Porto and other parties?
No, I don't, that's the problem again. You basically push yourself as a typical in two different camps that are there. All what I said was a national economy didn't mean anybody, it is everybody.
It's everybody.
And everybody means that if we do it,
rise up Sri Lanka, rise up together, and that is the theme
it's not
song
whether you can't do it, whether you want to do it. And that's where I want to
and Ravi Karunanaike, thank you very much for being on Newsline. We've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, MPD,
and
as well.
we'll take you through to Rise Up Sri Lanka. Thank you. Take care. Have a great night, and God bless.
Thank you.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukut Ali.